G'day everyone, Michael from Battle Bunker TV again. Welcome back to part 2, this time with no sprue. I made a joke. So, we're going to assemble this model. This model is made of white metal. This is Lelu from the Malifaux range. So, Lelu's single part body, and he's got an arm, and he's got a tail. Now, assembling a metal model is mostly the same sort of principles as assembling a plastic model, except that you generally need to do what's called pinning on a metal model. We'll get into that in a minute. You also use super glue rather than a plastic glue. The other thing here is I'm not going to use these lovely clippers that I was using for the plastic before. Using clippers on metal models tends to damage them a bit, so I like to keep this set clean for using on plastic only. I've got another set of clippers here. Like we had sprue before, this is a smaller sprue. This is more the kind of sprue that you might get a ring or something cast on, so your engagement ring or whatever. So this has got Lelu's arm and his tail there. Just like before, we're going to trim these off. So base of the tail there, bit of a snip, and base of his arm here. Now, on these sorts of things, you've generally got a little notch on the back here, and there'll be a little notch on the other part of the model here where those two parts go together. So when you're trimming it off, just be careful that you don't take that notch with you, unless you're going to pin the way that I pin. I tend to cut those off because when I get to the pinning part, I'm not going to want that there. Just like a metal model, we may have flash, so we want to get the model and have a good look. It can be a lot harder to see on metal models, and it can also be a lot easier to confuse detail for a bit of flash. You can get much worse flash on a metal model. They tend to be cast in a different process that is more prone to getting flash. Sometimes you can get huge, like almost like a bit of paper hanging off the edge made out of metal. This model doesn't have anything like that, but just beware that sometimes you will get fairly large areas of flash, and you've just got to be careful that you don't take any detail off. Trimming's basically the same, only you're applying a bit more pressure. I would tend to use further down the blade as well, just because the blade's a bit stronger at the bottom end. It also means if you're damaging the blade at all, you're damaging it further back, and the top will still be good for plastics. There's a fairly large notch here, which I'm just going to try and cut off. That's not coming off easily enough, so I pull out my clippers again, just try and get rid of a bit more of it before I get the knife back in there. And what I might actually do is go and get a stronger knife. I've grabbed a much stronger knife. This is your standard sort of Stanley knife. Be really careful doing this. Again, I've done this a lot. I also still cut myself occasionally, so I would be very careful. See, I've just stabbed myself in the thumb there. Again, I've done it a lot. I have calluses. It didn't cut me. If I didn't have a big callus on the end of my thumb, I would have just slashed my thumb open. So don't do what I just did. Be a lot more careful than me. When you've been doing this for 20 years, you can go back to being stupid. Alright, that looks fairly clean. So, if you've watched part 1 of the video, you'll see just doing this arm took longer than any bit other than the backpack on that Space Marine that I did. So metal models, you want to spend a lot more time making sure they're good. Now this is where I was talking about big bits of flash. You can see on the tail here, there's a huge bit of flash in here. That's just part of the casting process for some reason. There's obviously some bit in the mould. They may have put that in because the end of this tail is so delicate. Just want to snip that if I can. And so all that's done, because that bit's so fine, all that's done is flatten the lead. It hasn't actually cut it. So I'm going to get my good clippers, because this is such a fine bit of metal, it's not going to be a problem. I'm just going to carefully snip that out, because these are much better clippers than these dodgy $2 shop ones that I was using. And at the base of that little bit of flash, I'm going to trim it off there. And you can see again, we've got a huge bit of flash left behind. So you'll see there's a big flat spot where I've just cut this off. It's a problem with metal models, they're not as easy to trim down as plastic models are. So I'm just going to have a look there. I reckon that is a bit dodgy. So I'm just going to try and trim it a bit rounder with my knife. And then, because there is some sort of scoring detail on here, I'm just going to run my blade down a bit, a couple of times, just to pull a bit more detail back in there so it doesn't look as funny when I paint it. I'm just bending the end of the tail out a bit more. And similarly on the end of the tail, we've got a big blubber flash, got to get rid of that. So that's pretty flat now. So I've got my model. Just give him a bit of a once over. So some little bits of flash on the ends of his horns here. Very small mould line. Metal models will tend to have less mould lines than plastic models do, but when they do have them, they're a lot harder to remove. Always something to watch for when you're buying a metal model in a store, if you can see the blisters, and it's one of the advantages to buying in a bricks and mortar store rather than buying online, is you can actually see the models. Try and pick one that's in pretty good condition. And maybe one that doesn't have a tram track nearby. Okay, I can see there's actually quite a bit of flash on the inside of his leg here. That's where I was saying in part one, always check between the legs. I can see Matt giggling internally about that one, but that's not too bad. But there's still quite a bit on the inside of his other calf and the inside of his other thigh. So same technique, I'm just running the blade down backwards along the leg just to trim that out. That's not too bad. Again, it looks like I've made it flat because basically what I've done is I've just polished it with a blade, so it looks a bit different to the rest of the metal. Don't worry about that at all. It's not a thing, it's just because effectively you have just polished it. So you've got a bit of polished metal sitting against a bit of not polished metal, so it looks a bit funny. Once you undercoat it, you won't be able to tell the difference. Alright, so let's talk about pinning. What is pinning? Why would we want to pin? Pinning's what it sounds like. I'm going to put a pin in this model to stick the two bits together. Much like in hospital, if you break your leg, they may pin the parts together so the bone can heal. We do it to make the model stronger. To pin, we use a pin vise. Now, you can use a drill. Some people might use a hobby Dremel or something like that. I tend to like to do it by hand, unless I'm doing a lot of models at once. You can pin plastic models. Normally you don't need to. If they're big, if you stick your metal bit to a plastic model, you should definitely pin it because the bond's a lot weaker. Normally with a metal model though, it's always worth pinning anything that's getting stuck on. So what we're going to do is take this, drill into both parts, and we're going to put a little metal pin between. So on Lelou's body, he's got a little notch here where his arm's supposed to go. So I'm just going to have a look there, and I didn't actually clean this, so I'm just going to clean the edge of that so we can get a nice join. Take my pin vise, I'm going to put it in the middle of the hole here. I'm just going to drill a hole. This is something that's fairly unpleasant to do. When you're new to the hobby, you're really going to hate doing this, particularly if you're doing a lot of metal models. If you start with a game like War Machine, we have a lot of metal models with a lot of parts, you are really going to learn to hate pinning really fast. You can get quite a sore hand from doing this. My wrist is hurting already and I've only just started doing it. So I've gone in a little bit, there's a bit of flash just gone around my drill bit, so just pull it out occasionally and get rid of that bit of flash. After a while you get used to drilling the right distance through stuff. It's quite easy, particularly when you start pinning for the first time, to go all the way through. On a model like this, it's not a lot of detail on the back, it's not that big an issue. You can always get a bit of putty, fill it in, not a problem. The way that I like to test whether I've gone in far enough is to put the drill bit in, and I put my fingernail on the end and pull the bit out, and I see how far it's gone in. Now this has got a notch which is about 1.5 mil in, so I've gone in about 2.5 mil, which I don't think is quite far enough for the size of his arm. Also, I can look visually on the shoulder here and see I can probably go another couple of mil without it being a problem. Alright, so now I reckon I've gone about 2.5, maybe 3 mil in. Just going to go a touch further. Alright, I reckon I've got about 3.5 mil in now, which is fine. So that was the easy part. Because it's already got a pilot hole that's supposed to be there for this arm to stick into, I didn't really have to worry about putting a dot or anything like that there so that my drill wouldn't go funny. On this bit, all I've got is a flat edge, so I need to find a way of guiding the drill bit in so that it doesn't sort of roll off the edge. If I just try and start drilling that with my pin vise, I'm going to start twisting it and the pin vise is going to walk off the edge or fall out, stab me in the hand, something like that. Don't want that to happen, so I'm going to make a guide hole. Now, I haven't brought my toolkit over, so I'm going to go and get another tool. So this is a random spiky object. I picked these up from a $2 store. I can't even remember what they were. Some sort of picks or hooks. They have a point on them, which is all I need. So I'm going to decide where I want my pin to go in. Generally in the middle of the bit you're pinning. Get my little thing, and I'm just going to push in here and make a little pilot hole for my drill. So you can see on the end there, I've just put a little dot. That's going to make it easier for the pin vise to go in. Look, it doesn't always work 100%. What I also sometimes do when I'm doing something like this, I put my drill into the hole and I put my fingers around the end of the drill just to hold it in place. It's not dangerous, it's not going to cut you. Okay, maybe if you're using a diamond drill bit, it might be a bit more dangerous because they're actually sharp. But these hobby bits don't tend to be dangerous at all. This is going in fairly nicely. So again on this, I want to go in at 3-4 mil. Sometimes on a model you won't get to go in that far. The piece might be too thin. You've just got to be careful. Sometimes you may need to use thicker or thinner drill bits as well. I tend to use a 0.85mm drill bit, which if you're in another country, you probably have to translate that into whatever you have. In hobby terms, I think it's a number 66 drill bit. So again, I'm just going to put my finger on the end, pull this out. So I'm about 2.5mm in, so I want to go about double that. Some people pin further, some people don't pin as much. Some people use thicker rod. Really depends what you're doing. If you're doing, say you're doing war machine, you're doing a war jack, you probably want to use something thicker than what I'm using because the parts are a lot heavier. This is just the arm on a human-sized model. LFO is a 32mm scale game, so the models aren't too big. The other thing you might notice is like just now when I drilled in, not much happened. That's because there's a little bit of gunk in my drill bit that I haven't pulled out. So I'm just basically putting the pin vise in my hand, putting my nails in, and just sort of twisting it backwards. And that'll just sort of run any gunk out of the drill bit. You also get used after a while to seeing, you get this, as I was saying before, this bit of trailing sort of metal that comes out of where you're pinning or where you're drilling. Often you can tell by how far that's gone down the drill, how far you've drilled in. Some miniatures are made out of different weights of metal as well. Some are softer, some are harder. You have to be a bit more careful when you're drilling into something soft, and you put a lot more effort in when you're drilling something hard. So that's got a fairly nice hole in it now. So, still haven't told you what pinning actually is. Let's go into that. This is a paper clip. What's a paper clip for? That's for holding papers together. I also use them for pinning. Some people like to use brass rod, some people like to use just metal wire. Wire's not generally good for it because it's too flexible. You want something stiff, and paperclip is fairly stiff. You also get fairly nicely defined sections. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it off the end here. And very shortly you shall know what pinning is. So we have a pin. What else do I need that I didn't bring over because I wasn't thinking about it? A pair of pliers. I'll be back in a minute. So I'm back with a pair of pliers. So I'm going to get my pin and I'm going to stick it in my pair of pliers. So I'm holding my pin. Now, for metal models, we want to use super glue. There are a bunch of different types of super glues you can use, from the cheap stuff from the supermarket all the way up to hobby glues, to araldite, which is a 2-part resin. I'm going to use a glue called Zappa Gap, which is a hobby glue. It does a bit of gap filling as well as gluing, and it dries fairly quickly. So, put a dab of glue on the end of my pin. Just get that blob there. Then I'm going to get my lovely drilled bit, and what I want to do is get the dab of glue to flow to the end and just try and get it to flow into the hole a bit through surface tension. Now this glue is being a bit rambunctious. There we go. So what I've done there is I've just dabbed my bit of glue so that's gone down into the hole, and then I'm just going to put my pin in. So I just push that in with the pliers, pull the pliers away, and there'll be a bit of glue residue around the outside. Just going to get a bit of paper towel. I'm just going to suck away that glue that's hanging around the outside of that there. If you get the super glue everywhere, it can make it a bit harder to paint later. The primer that you use may not stick very well to the glue. So now I've got an arm with a bit of metal sticking out of it. What good is that? Well, what it means is that when I want to attach this to the body, because I've drilled a hole in the body as well, I can stick that in. Now obviously this pin's way too long, but you can see the principle there. The pin is actually going to hold this together. So when we're playing the game, if I want to pick it up by the hand, I can. Obviously I haven't glued that, so it's still dangly. You still shouldn't, but you could. If it got knocked over, the arm's not going to come off. If you just glue that on, it's a very fragile connection, and once you've painted your model beautifully, you don't want it coming apart again accidentally. So, we know that I drilled my hole in Lelou's body about 3-4 mil in, so I'm just going to cut this pin down to about 3 or 4 millimeters. So again, just using my clippers there. So I've got a much shorter pin now, and we're just going to do the same thing as we did a moment ago. I'm just going to put a dot of glue on the end of the pin. Takes a bit of practice, you sort of get used to how much you need. You just want enough that it's going to flow down into the hole nicely and form a good bond. Stick him together like that. Let me just push the pin in. Now this takes a bit of practice, sometimes a bit of trial and error. This has gone together fairly well. There's a bit of a gap at the bottom. The other thing that's great about pinning a model is if you want to change the way it fits together a bit. So I've got Lelou's arm like this now. If I want, because he's on a pin, I could rotate it down, I could rotate it all the way upside down. If I wanted him to be carrying something, he could be like that. So you get a bit more posability out of it without too much extra effort. Now there is a slight gap underneath his arm there. So before I paint this model, that gap will get filled with a putty called green stuff. On metal models, it's not too uncommon to have that kind of stuff. So that's his arm done. I'm pretty happy with the way he's looking there, or prior to using green stuff to fill in the gaps a bit. So I'm just going to pin his tail in as well. So again, I'm just going to drill a hole. Now this is into his body, so I've got a lot further that I can drill in if I want to. Don't really need to, but it's nice to have that sort of safety net. So if you're new to pinning stuff, if say you were doing this model and this was the first model you were pinning, you might want to do the tail first, just because you've got a lot more room for error there. This is also a piece that I suspect is going to need green stuffing. The way this model's been constructed, I can't see how this tail would fit on perfectly without a bit of putty. So drilling in again I'm going to put my nail on. Because I've gone in a bit further this time, it's a bit stiffer. That's about 4.5, 5 mil, which is plenty. Then we've got his tail. Again, it's a flat edge, so I'm going to use my random tool and I'm going to just notch in a little pilot hole. Got my little pilot hole, going to get my pin vise again. Drill, drill, drill. I'm sure you get it by now. Matt's already bored, he's making noise over there. Again, this piece has heaps to drill into, so a bit more margin for error. Something to keep in mind, particularly when you're doing something like this sort of freehand drilling, make sure you're going in fairly straight. You don't want to be bending the pin vise. These drill bits will snap fairly readily if you don't take care of them. When you start doing this, I would definitely have a few spares because you are going to snap a bunch of them. It's just a learning process. I've gone in about 3 mil on this one, which is going to be plenty. This bit's unlikely to get touched in gameplay, so really we're pinning this in case the model gets dropped and we don't want it to snap off. So same thing, we're going to cut off a bit of paper clip, glue it, stick it in. I've still got the offcut from the other bit that I did. This I reckon is going to be long enough to pin this part. So pliers, double glue. Now I tend to do the extremity first, so in this case I'm going to do the tail, and in the other case I did the arm, rather than putting the pin in the body. The reason for that is that if I've got it a bit wrong, it's much easier to fix the hole in the body than it is to fix the hole in the extremity. A bit of paper towel, just dab off the glue there. Again, I know that the hole in the body is about 4mm deep, so I'll get my clippers, cut this off to about 4mm. That's actually probably a little bit too long now that I look at it. Just get a little touch more off the end of that. Another thing you can do if you're having trouble getting the pin to go in, sometimes when you push it in it's not going quite far enough, and you think it should, like sometimes you've drilled a really deep hole and it's just not going in, maybe the metal is a bit soft or something like that, you can sort of crimp down the end of this and make it a bit sharper. So again, double glue. When you stick this in, you can get away with having a bit more glue on it because you actually do want it to flow around the edges a bit and fill the gap slightly. A bit of metal still sticking out the back here, which I need to get rid of. So once again, got my two parts, stick my pin in. I'm just going to push the two parts together. And again, now I can decide, do I want his tail up, do I want to twist it down? I can do it however I like. Twist it off to the side. And that's basically pinning. So you're drilling holes in the two parts, putting a little bit of metal between. I like to use a paper clip, so a 0.85mm drill bit and a standard 1mm paper clip tends to go together really well. You twist that on. A glue like Zappa Gap that does a bit of gap filling is great. On this you won't be able to see it on the camera, but the glue's sort of filling in the little gap there. I'll still rub a bit of green stuff in there later, and I'll show you when I do that. But that's basically pinning, and that's how you assemble a metal model. You can use that on anything, from a Malifaux Lelu to a Warjack for War Machine to a metal Demon Prince in 40k, to any kind of old metal dreadnought, anything like that. Pinning is generally the way to go. Sometimes the thing's too small to pin and you can't, but generally those those sort of gaming pieces, you won't be touching the bits with pins. They might be, say, tank barrels on a 50mm Flames of War model, something like that. Don't really need to pin them. Sometimes what you might do there, and we'll probably go into this in a later video, is actually replace the whole barrel with a bit of tapered brass rod or something instead of the barrel that comes with it if you want to make it stronger. So pinning's not always appropriate, but where it is, you should always do it, because now I can do that, I can do that, I could throw him on the table and he's not going to break. If he was just glued, I couldn't do those things, or if I did, it wouldn't last long before it broke. So once I can be comfortable that once I've painted this model, he's not going to come apart in a hurry, and I'm not going to have to do a repair job where I've got to glue him back together and then repaint all the areas where the paint's chipped off because he broke. Thanks for watching part 2. What I'm going to do is a painting tutorial on that Space Marine. That'll be up in a few days. We'll just go through the basics of how to undercoat, how to do a basic paint job. I'm not going to do anything too exciting. We might even use some army painter on that. Metal models, you paint pretty much the same way, so we won't have a separate video painting the Lelu, but that's basically it. So if you've watched both parts of the tutorial, you now know what sprue is and how to paint a model, or how to assemble a model that's on a sprue, and you know what a metal model looks like and all the various tools you need and how to pin. They're the most important things about assembling models. We'll do some painting later. See you later. This bit, we're pinning it.
Sorry. I'll do it quietly.
You are going to be sorry, I'm going to pin you.